All right. What is the content triangle?
Yeah. So this has to be put in context of somebody, just the way that we used to write books, right? So if you were to take someone like Henry Thoreau, he very famously goes to Walden Pond in like 1848. And he's like, I'm going to escape society for 2 years. And he comes back with this book. And it's a great book. And I think that this is how a lot of people think of writing. They're like, I need a writer's retreat. I need to go to a hotel room, escape society. And there's this like necessary tension between living your life and spending time with people and doing things you want to do and writing. And it's like, if I'm going to write, I need to say no to everything else. And the second I have kids, the second work comes up, I can't write at all. And that's how I thought about writing for a long time. And it didn't work for me. And so rather what I said was, what we can do is we can see a book as the end state that's actually like a 5th or 6th draft of ideas that we're developing over time. And we can develop these ideas during the course of our ordinary lives through conversation like the one that we're having now. You're always getting feedback when you're having a conversation. So if you're communicating an idea, you're getting feedback from somebody who's saying, hey, that's pretty interesting, if they're leaning in, if they're nodding their head, or if they're dozing off, they're sort of looking sideways. They're obviously bored or confused, or you've lost them in some fundamental sense. So then if you go out to dinner and you say something, a bunch of people are laughing, people are saying, hey, that's really insightful. You make a point that then gets the conversation on a thread, and then that idea is sort of lingering in your mind as you're walking home. Well, go tweet that idea. Go put it in your email newsletter the next week. And what you're doing when you do that is you're continuing to get feedback. You're getting responses from people. People are giving you more data on, is this idea interesting? Can we reframe it in a way that makes more sense? And this is like what comedians are doing all the time, right? Like before a comedian goes and does their Netflix special, they're playing in small little comedy clubs or performing in small little comedy clubs where they're basically getting feedback on what the audience is doing. And so whereas the Thoreau model is like, okay, this is our first run, let's go do our Netflix special. The content triangle is basically getting all these mini points of feedback and over time doubling down on what works, compressing your best ideas, so that then by the time you do publish your book, by the time you do have that performance, it is like your 5th, your 10th run through that idea rather than just your first.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. A lot of comedians do that. Mark Norman is famous for like just being really popular on Twitter, and then he just develops those in the clubs, whichever tweet. He says whichever tweet gets the most retweets the quickest.
Yep.
That's the one he runs with. Then he runs that bit in the club, sees what words make it funny, and then goes on the full special with it.
Exactly.
Interesting. Content triangle. Is that something you kind of coined?
Yeah. But
nice.
This is a big thing. Coin terms.
Coin terms.
Like this is huge. Like I think that this is one of the
Perell triangle.
I was talking to a friend the other day who's been sort of deep in the game of studying what different online creators who are successful, like what do they do? And he said they do 2 things really well. The first is they coin terms. So they basically will take something like the content triangle, which is an entire concept and stuff, and they'll just come up with a term for it, and then it sort of gets spread into the ether, and then that name points back to them. So as people use it, people are like, oh, who came up with the content triangle? And the thing is, sometimes it works really well. Sometimes, it doesn't work super well. The inventor of FOMO, he came up with 2 terms, one of which was FOMO, and then in that same article where he came up with it, it was like fear of something else, and that other one just didn't catch on, but FOMO like entered the lexicon, and he just developed the term. So that was the first thing. Coin terms. If you come up with an idea, I'm coining terms all the time. And then the second is being self-referential, so linking back to yourself, so that what people do is they get in this hyperlinked web of your ideas, and then you create this contained ecosystem of your thought. And those 2 things, I think online creators who do that well tend to be quite successful.
So let's move into this like conversation about like rough content marketing, is what I guess you would call it. I first found you because you were kind of hyper focused on Twitter. And I think I found you during the pandemic time when like everyone was kind of inside.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this motherfucker is tweeting like every 4 seconds. Like, I mean, I think you probably tweet like 20 times a day.
Yeah.
Right? Is that accurate?
I tweeted a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed like you were inside like everyone else and just tweeting all the time. And so that's where you kept popping up. And I was like, okay, this is pretty good stuff. I'm going to follow this. And that was kind of the first time I'd actually got really involved in Twitter. I've had a Twitter for years. And you seem to be hyper focused on Twitter, whereas Twitter was usually kind of like this little, like, it's a thing you also had in addition to your blog. It's like in your social role. It's like Twitter, TikTok.
It's like your supporting actor.
Yeah. And yours was like, I remember seeing your site and it was like you had your blog and then only one social link, Twitter. And I was like, I don't know if this is a smart thing or he just hates all the other social platforms, because you think if you post it on all the other social platforms, you get more reach, but you were just on Twitter. Was that a deliberate thing, or did you just like Twitter better? What was the thought process behind that?
So there are a couple things. First of all, Twitter just rocks. Like, it's the best way to meet people.
Pretty awesome.
All my friends I meet through Twitter. It's like the best social network ever.
You got me on Twitter, by the way. I started posting on it because of you.
Good.
Yeah.
That's
I always had it, like I said, but I just spammed people with links to my blog.
And you feel like you meet people pretty well through Twitter?
So I was just like shocked that of like the A-list people I'll have conversations with in my messages, and I'm like, this doesn't happen on Facebook.
It's insane, right? Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah.
And so I learned that when I was maybe like 19 years old, and it was just like it was just one of those quake moments. You know, it was like I was going to school in a small town in North Carolina, and I just didn't have friends who were interested in ideas. And then I could just go on Twitter and unlock opportunities for myself with a tweet, and knowing how to go from tweets to DMs. Like, that was so transformative for me. And so what happened was, back then, the way Twitter worked was, instead of a like, it was a favorite. And instead of it was a star instead of a heart. And it was all chronological at the time. And so if you had a good tweet, like a fire tweet, you get like 17 likes because of the way that the platform was structured. And the only way that someone could see your tweet who didn't follow you was somebody who they followed would retweet you. But then what happened was around, I don't know, like 2018, 2019, Twitter embraced this algorithmic feed. And there's a lot of negative second order consequences of this. But one of the best things was for creators, if you knew how to leverage this feed, your reach and your distribution on your tweets could, like, I'm talking 1000x of what it used to be. And so what happened was I remember I went into 2020 with 30,000 followers. By the end of 2020, I had, maybe this was 2019 or something. By the end of 2020, I had something like 75,000 followers, maybe 100,000 followers. And then it just like exploded even this year too. It was something like that. And it was just this moment where, because of the algorithm change, if you knew how to leverage the platform, your audience could just explode. And it all happened for me basically during the pandemic, was when I really focused on it. I made a course on how to crush it on Twitter. And when James Clear has this great line, he says, if you want to learn, or if you think you can learn a lot by reading a book, try writing one. And it's the same thing. If you think you can learn a lot by being a student, try teaching a course. And once you teach a course, like, I figured out all these subtle things, right? All these little, this thing, that thing, and just together, the symphony of those strategies combined to just create sort of an orchestra and an explosion of growth.
Yeah, I watched that and I was just like, that's pretty impressive. And so the thing that convinced me, actually, get this, I don't know if you guessed this, the thing that convinced me, I was just like, dude, this kid's onto something cool, is when Balaji started liking your tweets. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was just like, that's pretty awesome. And it's just like, I'm assuming y'all didn't like super know each other that well or something.
But I met him through Twitter, you know?
Exactly. So I was just like, okay, that's a pretty cool thing. So I started tweeting pretty recently, I guess around that time last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been kind of cool. It is a little bit distracting. I read an essay or a thread, I forgot, one of yours, that you said you were like definitely addicted quite a bit.
Definitely addicted.
But it almost seems like okay, there's certain addictions, like if you're doing heroin and you're blowing people under a bridge for it, that's a bad addiction. Yeah. If you're tweeting all day but learning, it's kind of like, well, it's an addiction, but it's not like horrible. It's like addicted to working out. It's like, it's kind of positive, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it just got to the point though where it was negative. I was just spending so much time on Twitter, and also I wanted to explore ideas with a little bit more depth in my life. And so sometime, it was like in May or so, I basically started just deleting Twitter off my phone every single day. And then I only use Twitter at night now. And then I can only, on my computer, I can only go to my own profile. So if I have an idea, I can tweet it right away. Then I just close it, and I can just look at stuff on my own profile, but I won't get sucked into the feed. And then at night, I'll just download Twitter and then just catch up with the world then. But I just literally delete Twitter off my phone every day. Like, it's just not even downloaded right now.
I've noticed you've tweeted a lot less now.
Which is now a new problem. Now I want to start tweeting a lot more. But so I'm trying to figure out how to balance.
You missed it. They got you back.
Exactly.
They got you back. So when I started tweeting a lot more, I was going to be like, I'm going to tweet 3 times a day. I thought it was going to be very easy. It's actually, and so it's kind of what we talked about, the distillation of information before, where you actually kind of have to take a big thought and then kind of cram it down into something small. And so what I've done lately is, like you said, with the Drew Barrymore example of like forgetting what you're writing.
Yeah.
I would say, okay, I'm going to tweet in morning, afternoon, night, and let's see what happens.
Sure.
So I'll wake up in the morning and be like, damn, I got nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, for any of my other writing, I have a big blog called Neville's Blog File or whatever. And it's just a bunch of blog posts, topics I want to write about. So I made one called Tweets. And that's been super helpful. And I recently added today, and tell me what you think of these. So one thing I've learned through tweeting is that just writing independently is kind of one thing, but then getting them shared really juices the algorithm, and that's where you can go to the moon. So Sam Parr, who lived down the street over here, the Hustle crew has like pretty large Twitter followings.
Yep.
One of the things they'll do is like when something's pretty good, they'll all retweet it to all their audiences. Then it compounds, and then those people, et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of set off the chain reaction on the algo. And so I've started realizing, what have I done that's done something like that? So when I've tweeted at like the mayor of Miami or something like that, or we met him and he tweeted our names, it's just like, oh, you get a huge boost there. So his audience sees your audience, and then you get a lot of followers. So I started doing things like, I'm going to start quote tweeting a little bit more, commenting on popular things, and then also responding to popular people's tweets a lot more.
Yes, that works really well.
So those are on the right track.
Responding to other people's popular tweets works really well, but the thing that works the best is threads. Because the thing is, I think that threads are like they're just treated differently. I think that when they first came out, that's when you had the biggest advantage, because it was as if they treated all of the comments on a single thread as the equivalent to a bunch of comments on one tweet. And so you were like tricking the algorithm into thinking that a thread was like, it didn't know to disassociate a thread versus a tweet. And then you had all these replies from people who were going on Readwise, save tweet and stuff. So when you would write a thread, it would necessarily just get this explosion in engagement. And so that thread advantage I still think exists. But then also there's this weird psychological thing that makes absolutely no sense, but we all feel it, where like you'll see a thread on Twitter and you'll be like, I need to read this right now. Just spend a bunch of time reading threads, and like rationally it doesn't make sense. Like, go read a book, go read some article, something that will stand the test of time. But there's something about a thread that everyone's talking about where you're like, I need to read this.
Sam Walton built Walmart. Here's how he did it.
Yeah, exactly.
19 threads.
Exactly. And I don't know, people just really engage with threads.
You know what? I also see them engaging. I've done threads a couple times. I've heard this advice before. I've done it. And like the number one thing is like read Wiseo, save thread.
Yes.
Like,
exactly.
So meaning they're not reading it. They're just saving it somewhere. And I've done that too, where I'm like, oh, this is a good thread, but I don't feel like reading it right now. So I'll save it.
And then you can save it to your notes and all those sorts of things. But threads are the really good way to grow.
So it's kind of just like a Twitter version of a blog post.
But people read them and they get shared so much.
Yeah, I tried a couple of them, and some of them, of course, like anything, some of them worked, some of them didn't, and I learned a couple things in the meantime. But it sounds like just getting in front of other people's audiences is kind of the way to grow the best.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing. When I started, I was very deliberate. I had certain people who I just wrote for, and then I was like, how can I get this person to share it? And then they would share it. And that's how I built my audience for a long time. I mean, I almost think of it like sponsors. Like, you have a couple big people with big followings, and you sponsor their growth. So they'll happily come on your podcast. They will promote your stuff. They'll retweet it. They'll share it on their blogs. And it's hard to find those. This isn't like a scalable strategy. I think a lot of distribution just comes from hustle and grit and tenacity and a certain kind of creativity. And so, yeah, I found a couple people to sort of sponsor my growth, and they got me up on skis. And once I was up on skis, just kind of went from there.
I've kind of noticed Twitter becoming of far, far, far more importance than when it started. It used to be kind of a joke. They started referencing it on the news, and then it became like a part of the thing. Then I think the president at one point gets on and starts saying crazy stuff, and like that really, I don't know. I think that like catalyzed some sort of huge change. I don't know what happened there, but it seemed like it was far more important after that. And it seems like Twitter is kind of the pulse on the world. You remember how Reddit used to be the pulse on the world? It was like the front page of the internet. It aggregated all the thoughts, ideas, and sifted the cool ones to the top. Now I think it might be Twitter. So you get someone like Balaji tweeting stuff that should be tweeted 10 years in the future, and then people read his stuff and make kind of tweets about that, and then they make YouTube videos about that, then podcast videos about
Twitter's so... The thing about Twitter is like you open up on your phone and you're like, okay, this is just this private platform. It's like this algorithm just sort of working for my interests, and it's in theory just giving me this personalized newspaper, and it's just me and the algorithm, and these people who I'm following are directly speaking to me. It's not like that at all. And the moment that the moment that changed this for me was I was on an airplane, and the guy sitting across from me was reading my Twitter, and I was like, oh my goodness, this platform is so global, and people like there's not just these numbers of impressions. It's like people are actually reading these things, and it's so easy for it to just feel like intimate and one-on-one when in fact it's quite global and large in scale.
Well, it's just like a better blog. If you think about it, what is a blog? It's a platform that you maintain on WordPress that takes a lot of effort and servers and DNS knowledge, and then you have to upload something to it, and then you also have to make a title, and then you have to publish it somewhere and then tell people about it. Whereas Twitter, it's like you just post it and it does the rest.
That's true.
Done.
That's true. But the thing is, look, I think that you have to ask, like, why are you creating stuff on the internet? And for us, I mean, it supports our lives. And so for me,
like access money. Yeah.
For me, I have employees, who I need to pay their salaries and pay for their healthcare and all those sorts of things. And so there's real business reasons why I'm sharing stuff on the internet. And so I have to think about, okay, how do I create a customer from my ideas? And I think of it a lot like dating. I think Twitter is the bar. It's like the best bar ever, but you're sort of, you're mingling, you're doing small talk, you're sort of sharing like your high level ideas.
Bar has a shit ton of dudes also.
Like Twitter's not the player, just like the bar. It's not the place to just meet someone and dive into your life philosophy. But you know what? You meet someone, you exchange numbers, you get someone on your email list, right? You exchange numbers, they're on the email list, you begin to sort of build the relationship. So now you're in emails, you're sort of sending them to, hey, here's a YouTube video, here's like an article that I wrote. You're building the relationship. And then eventually the way that this goes over a long time horizon is they'll listen to podcasts like this over and over, and they'll have your voice in their ear. Maybe they'll read your book, and then they sign up for a course. They sign up for the product that you sell. And so I do think of it like dating. And I think that Twitter just so happens to be, if you're sharing ideas, just the best bar in the world.
That's a great analogy. Elon Musk recently liked to quote...
content triangle. That would be a good piece, right? So you just said that's a good analogy. So I just got feedback from you that is like a good thing that I haven't said before. If I were to share that and then a couple other people say, hey, that's good. Now that's my blog post. That's already written.
Nice. I do something similar with... I do a Friday email. I think everyone does either a Friday or Monday email.
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
I think you do both.
I do both.
You both? So I do a Friday email. And it's generally, I just take my tweets and put it in the, the email. And that's kind of like the whole email. Elon Musk had a great tweet that he liked by a woman named Bindu, and I forgot her last name, but you can look it up. And it said something like, Twitter is the closest thing we have to a human neural network. Each person is a node with weights and measures that goes on to pass its biases to the next. And I thought, I was just like, damn. That's pretty cool. Have you heard that?
No, but I like that.
So it's kind of he always talks about mind viruses. So a virus can be a good or bad thing.
Sure.
He's not making it a bad thing, but he's saying an idea can catch on and permeate through society.
Of course.
Right. And a lot of it happens through Twitter first and then permeates down to some of the other social platforms. So I don't know. I think Twitter is quickly becoming like this real pulse of the world. And I love that it's so, people complain that it's a little bit, it's toxic or bad. But I like that you're allowed to be toxic or bad and you don't have to listen to that person. But the good stuff kind of wins out. And also, it's just like no one's getting hurt on Twitter necessarily. It's just like words. So it's not a big deal. So
yeah, I mean, I think that like there's moments where, well, I know a lot of people have had some really just brutal things happen to them on Twitter. And when it comes to the toxic aspect of Twitter, I think that the problem with that is that the way that the platform onboards you, I think leads you to a lot of that toxicity. And if you compare a platform like Twitter, which if you want to create a more sheltered environment, a place where it does have less of those toxic features and you can curate your environment, it just takes a lot of agency and sort of cleverness, like familiarity with the platform from the user's perspective, knowing you can block people, you can mute certain keywords by changing your social graph and interacting with the platform in a certain way. Like every single time you like something, you're training the algorithm on what they should serve you. But the thing is, this requires a lot of work from the user, where if the next Twitter, whatever it is going to look a lot more like TikTok. You go on TikTok and you don't really, I mean, you can follow people, but that's not a central piece of the algorithm. What makes TikTok so special is that the algorithm kind of instantly learns your tastes and then gives you more of what you want. And so it does a lot of that filtration automatically.
I like the option of like, I wish there was like a mood that you can say.
Yeah.
Like Twitter, like in the morning, sometimes I'm like, okay,
funny.
Like outrage is great, but like, come on, show me cats.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, whatever. I wish I could just say, right now, I'm not in the mood for that.
Yep.
So Twitter, give me some of the good stuff.
YouTube does a good job of this. At the very top now, there's like music and there's sports. Like I love golf highlights. Like I never miss my golf highlights from PGA Tour ever. But like, don't give me that at 10 a.m. because that's when I need my music. Or at 2 p.m., that's when I watch 10 to 15 minute YouTube essays. And so I'm in all these different moods. And the thing is, on Sunday evening, that's when I watch my golf highlights.
So one of the upsides of Twitter that you've mentioned, a lot of Twitter talk here, but one of the upsides you've mentioned is kind of like being able to interact with people directly, like Balaji or some like big time people that you otherwise probably wouldn't have as much access to.
Yeah.
Have you invested in companies through Twitter and things like that? What are some upsides of being popular on Twitter?
Yeah, I think investing is one of the big ones. But the thing that I just adore about Twitter is finding up and coming creators who they have 500 to 3,000 followers. They're sharing really interesting things and they're kind of have like their own pulse on the world, like their own vibration that is different from the consensus. And I just reach out to them and we hop on the phone and we just talk. I mean, that is how I make my best friends in the world. Like people who have small audiences on Twitter who are distinct and differentiated, and just bring them together even. I mean, that's then what I'll do is wherever I go, I'll have a couple friends who are like that. And then if I fly into Los Angeles, we'll just do a dinner with a bunch of them. And so you can just be a connector of those people. And they tend to just have distinct views on the world. And I'm always just trying to get out of the consensus, like trying to find people who are into weird ideas. They're sort of on the fringes. They like have their wavelength and they have some kind of perspective on the world that I'm not seeing elsewhere. And being able to reach out to those people and have it be kind of a big deal for them is the best part of having an audience on Twitter.
Do you follow any specific communities like Build in Public or anything?
I'm familiar with Build in Public, but for me, it's just, it's just a bunch of like what I love is people who in another life they would be academics, but they're sort of unsatisfied with the academic path. So they tend to work, a normal job or something, but they're like extremely interested in ideas, but then they don't really get to implement ideas in their work. And so they go home and they're just like sort of like solo academics. They just do it for fun. They'll read like all these crazy books and just like they're obsessed with figuring out the world.
Solo academic. I like that
I just
term.
reach out to them.
Yeah.
I love those
content
people.
triangle. That's a new one.
Yeah,
Solo
exactly.
academic.
Solo academics.
Yeah. The solo academic. That's an interesting term. What do you use, like a machine or system? Like you said, like, I guess you use Notion.
Yeah.
I guess, or is it just kind of random stuff? Do you, so I'm trying to do like a quote tweet of this, of that. Is that a mistake? Is this how you do it? Or you just kind of follow your passion?
Well, okay. If you want to grow your audience on Twitter, write threads and get more in touch with when you feel an epiphany. Epiphanies are felt. They're in your body, not in your mind. And so the thing is that a lot of what stops people from doing well creatively is they lose touch with what their body is telling them. And I think that a lot of people, in terms to just try to be more productive, what they'll do is they'll suppress their emotions. Because like if you look at a kid, they're ruled by their emotions. And then I think often phase 2 is to suppress your emotions. You become totally stoic, not in the literal sense of the term, but stoic in the way that people speak about it culturally. And so you sort of turn off your emotions. But then what I spend a lot of time doing and working on with my students is then reactivating the emotions, not so that you're ruled by them, but so that they can sort of help you. And so you can listen to what your body is saying. And if you ever go, you're reading a book, you're at an art museum, you're having a conversation, like your body actually tells you once you've come up with an insight. All this to say, when it comes to Twitter, is it's sort of like this barbell of like small little insights. So last night I'm sitting down and I'm reading about this new platform called Urbit, which is like a new computing platform. And then I'm working on this documentary of my favorite musician. And I'm going to spend I've spent 4 months working on this. I'm spend till the end of the year working on this. And so it's taking up a huge portion of my life, just learning about these two things. And I realized like, okay, because I'm stressing out about this. And I'm like, you know what? So the problem with traditional productivity advice is that often the big breakthroughs that you have don't feel productive in the moment. And so I'm stressing out. And then that is the answer that I get that lowers my stress. And so it's one sentence. And so I go out and I tweet it, gets more than 1,000 likes. And so that just is from this like internal warfare being waged in my mind. And the sense of calm that I got said, okay, I should go tweet that. So that's like one end of the spectrum, which is just small little tweets. And then the other end is just good tweet storms that, Sahil Bloom does this really well. Truck Fawn does this really well. And where what you're doing is you're just taking an idea and you're simplifying it and you're distilling it in a way that's easily shared and easily understood.
Excellent. So speaking of Trung, speaking of Sahil, both I follow. Who are some other good follows on Twitter, in your opinion? And it doesn't have to be necessarily about writing or anything.
Yeah. I think that Nicole Williams, she's an investor in New York. She's incredible. Jonathan B is one of my very best friends. He and I are working on another thing that has nothing to do with the other stuff that I'm working on. I'm just driven by curiosity. We're working on a giant lecture series about Rene Girard. Jeremy Giffen, who is an investor, is a partner at Tiny Capital. He and I just wrote this liberal arts piece together. I'd say that those three people, they all have less than maybe 15,000 followers. And they're all just phenomenally interesting. I disagree with a lot of things that they'll say, but they just surface so much novelty in my life, and they're very good curators, and so I can take their threads and I can just go follow them.
Interesting. Do you use lists to manage your Twitter?
I probably should, but I just don't.
But then doesn't your feed get clunked up with people? Like one person, like let's say Jonathan B. I don't know anything about it, but let's say he loves writing good stuff.
You know what I do? This is like one of my favorite ways to use Twitter. Rather than lists, I found my own workaround. People who I like following, I'll go and I'll look at their likes and I'll just read their likes from the past couple days. And that is the best Twitter thread there is.
Interesting.
So actually, I do kind of use a list, and I get to my exactly what you're kind of getting at, which is like the deeper reason why you would use a list. But I find that just looking at the likes of people you admire is
well, I found just like my Twitter thread feed is quite enjoyable because I only follow roughly 100 in that range.
Oh, good for
people,
you.
like Elon Musk and stuff. So I actually don't follow you, but you're at the top of my. I have one called like. I think it's called Copywriters because I'd named it one time and then it just added to it.
Yeah.
But you're at like the top of that list. And so I see your stuff when I go to that list. But you used to tweet so much that I was like, all right, this is a little bit too much David Perell.
Right.
And so I try to get like a balanced Twitter feed. And so I have all these different lists and it's made it quite interesting. Like sometimes like in the morning, I want just like fun stuff. So I have one called Sciencey Stuff.
Yeah.
And I follow all these like science accounts. And it's a really good time. And then I don't have to view political stuff and all that kind of everything.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. I like that. Well, I think there was a lot of Twitter stuff. It's pretty fascinating. That's kind of what I know you for. So sorry for so much